Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. And welcome back to Coast, back with Stephen Quayle. And as I mentioned, we'll take your calls next hour. They love lining up to call you, Stephen. Happens all the time.
Well, I don't know. I'm glad that people are interested in this. Let me talk about fictional indoctrination, because you and I have addressed that with the Twilight Zone. And by the way, what a great series!
Loved it.
I'm going back, George, and watching all of them, because if you remember, they had one too about on the airplane where they had the little demons on the wings.
The gremlins on the wings.
Yes, and gremlins are covered. By the way, this book it's a treatise. It's 460 some pages long, with enough footnotes to make a podiatrist happy. Okay, I mean the thing is footnoted because there's so much information. But I want to read something written by a guy, and this is really good, Alan Watts. And first of all, you and I have talked about, George, on Coast to Coast, that fiction is employed to indoctrinate cultures into new ways of thinking. Okay. And 1984, great example. But here's what he says. Things or ideas which would otherwise be seen as bizarre, vulgar, undesirable, or impossible are inserted into films in the realm of fantasy. When the viewers watch these films, his or her mind is left open to suggestion, and the conditioning process begins. Wow, wow, wow. You can take all the fiction. I'm a fiction fan. The motion picture, the history of motion pictures, whether it's Dr. Nosferatu or some of the things, the early science fiction. It's fascinating, man, but it's a conditioning process. 1984, good night. Telepresence. Now we're hearing Samsung say about their TVs, better watch what you're doing in front of our TVs.
We're watching you.
They're watching you. So what happens when you think you're watching it? It's watching you. So that's why the little creatures is so important. And I think, as you know from past interviews we've done, I really have tried to do my homework, so to walk someone through, basically to let them draw their own conclusions, but they'll find out that the fairy tales and the childhood stories were far more malevolent and with a central theme. And, when you can control, again, a future generation by a present fear, you can mold that society. Here we are, 1984. We're forgive me, it's not 1984, but all the warnings are there.
You're going back into time on us, Stephen.
Yep, and the time machine, In essence, I still believe that one of the most prominent science fiction movies I ever saw was A Time Machine with Rod Taylor, because basically you had the Morlocks and you had the Eloys. And obviously there were a lot of people that he was suggesting that the industrialists were the Morlocks, who the standard working class was the Eloi. But that's what I believe we're getting prepared for. And to serve man, George, is not just a Twilight Zone episode. It literally is coming to pass, because when you see the changing of our atmosphere, chemtrail, weather warfare, finally after all these years now, enough people are looking up saying, wow, those aren't contrails, they're chemical trails. But the point being is everything is changing. The weather's changing. I believe it's being manipulated. Obviously, we're seeing strange events, the West Coast burning up and the East Coast freezing in its tracks.
Yeah.
So fictional indoctrination, it's really, really important that people understand this. They can get my books on my website. And by the way, Genesis 6 Giants now, that has been the most, I would say, this interesting subject matter that I've written about, judging not only on book sales, but the questions I get continually asked for the last 2 decades. What I did with Genesis 6, I went back and revised it. I found an ancient manuscript that I had no idea that existed by a gentleman named Woods, talking about the really big giants, like, for instance, the Cyclops, Polyphemus, Polyphemus. Some people pronounce it Polyphemus, but I believe it's Polyphemus. And they thought that was just a fictional account. Well, in Genesis 6 Giants now, I've dedicated over 200 pages to some of the oldest, biggest giants. Most people don't even know that Maximus, some people pronounce it Maximus. The point being, this guy was 9 feet tall. He basically ate 40 pounds of meat, drank 6 gallons of wine, could outrun chariots, could basically punch a horse and knock it out, literally knock it out and knock its teeth out, kick a horse's hind quarter and break its hip. And this is a guy that was basically a 3-year emperor of Rome. People don't understand that Charlemagne had giants who were in his service that were recorded. Now, understand, recorded to be 18 feet tall. Well, then I get the skeptics saying, well, that wouldn't happen because of gravity. Listen, if you're an 18-foot-tall giant, something happened to your DNA, and again, the normal force of gravity, which is a pressure, is offset by the supernatural element working in that genome. So for the record, giants aren't bound by the same things. I mean, when you're talking about some of these guys that are so big, now 400 feet's pretty tall, okay? People say, I don't believe that. Yet, it's recorded that the Roman emperors fought over his bones and that he was found in a mummified version with his elbow actually leaning on a ship that had gone ashore with its on the top of its mast, okay? His supposedly thigh was 120 feet. So
Jeez.
Where do the Cyclopean legends come from? Where do the Greek myths come from? And it's fascinating.
It's got to be based on things they saw.
They saw. And they weren't like doing acid in those days, I mean, they weren't basically just writing this stuff. And we're talking Roman emperors, and I think that some of the most amazing stuff to me, now understand, after writing about this stuff for 20 years, then I started to find out, basically when...
But why, Stephen, is that being kept a secret?
Okay, because, again, he who controls the past determines the future. Because they cannot explain the giants in an evolutionary mode except to call it Gigantopithecus, okay? And Gigantopithecus is the name that they call the great ape. But these guys are bigger than great apes. They're thinking individuals. They're smart. They're not like oafs, okay? They're not like Shrek with little, suction cup antennas coming out of their heads. Obviously, some of them are very grotesque, but they're also very, very bright. I mean, the settling of the British Isles, you cannot even deal with the history of the British Isles without finding the Romans fighting the Celtic giants or fighting the berserkers in Germany. 35,000 Roman soldiers were killed in one day by the tribe of giants called berserkers. So when someone says, well, he went berserk, they didn't even know where that term came from. So what I've done is gone back and basically rewritten the Genesis 6 account, and I haven't rewritten the account, but I've taken all of the older data, which is mind-blowing because, quite candidly, George, I missed it. I mean, when you talk about Josephus, Antiquity of the Jews, talking about Eleazar, a 10-foot tall giant, and even, by the way, the chroniclers of Charlemagne claim Charlemagne was 8 feet tall, and then they argue, was he 7, 9, or 8 feet? Well, I got news for you. He was a big dude, but he had guys that were 18 feet tall, and one of them was named, and I think it's pronounced Aenotheus, and I can't pronounce Anathus or something like that. The point being is that we're talking about individuals that legends related to, that bones indicated. Now, again, going back to Sardinia, a couple months ago in February, I sent a team over there, an expedition, and what we're doing, George, is basically putting together a series of TV programs that'll appear on Tom Horn's Skywatch TV, and then they'll be going to a Roku channel.
Okay.
Because, and I want people to understand this, that because of the nature of the undertaking, I got to kind of sound a little mysterious. Because, I mean, we have to
You are mysterious.
Pardon?
You are mysterious.
Well, when people's lives are at stake, and again, I've got to watch over because by the grace of God, I don't want anybody to get hurt, and there are people that don't want this stuff out. This is called, by the way, core reality. And the core reality deals with the Giants' ancient history. Now, why do people want to cover it up? The Great Smithsonian cover-up, okay, it's simply this. It does not fit into an evolutionary model. Number two, it has to do with supernatural beings called angels. Obviously, people don't believe that, especially in a humanistic world. But now we've got a whole change in science. We've got science going into the spiritual realm, i.e. Kurzweil's book, An Age of Spiritual Machines. We've got Bill Joy's famous treatise, Why the Future Doesn't Need Us Anymore. We're talking about the idea of singularity. We're talking about eternal life. The story on Drudge, the headline, wasn't it? The billionaires are something about they want to live forever. Well, the point being is that, it goes back to Eden. Ye shall not surely die. Whenever the giants turn up, okay, the biggest mistake that I think those guys on, and forgive me, there was a show on the History Channel about giants. You cannot send a giant molar or extractable DNA to any of the mainstream colleges because they're all bought off. One of my guys had an interesting conversation with a scientist, and he said you cannot go to any of the mainstream genetic laboratories because we are informed to inform the powers when these artifacts come in or when extractable DNA comes in and they come in and take it. So who would be terrified of the truth? Well, those who seek to control the past want to determine the future. And you've had Tom Horn on your show.
Many times. And
Tom Horn has basically written about this in such a marvelous way that even the Vatican is looking for an alien god. When they name their telescope, one of their primary, spectroscopic or not infrared telescopes, Lucifer, and give it an acronym, and then Tom explains that he's interviewed probably some of the most prominent scientists within the Catholic faith. Now, that's not to say all Catholics are looking for an alien savior. But the point is when they're arguing over can aliens be saved, in other words, can aliens accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, you know that somebody's trying to change the focus. For instance, it's simple. Jesus died for mankind. The Scripture doesn't say he died for the fallen angels. It absolutely makes the opposite statement, Scripture says Jesus didn't die for the angels that sinned. So the point is that now look at Christianity. You and I have talked about this. Christianity is under attack like no other time in history. Now, we're hearing a lot about Planet X, Nibiru, the 10th planet, the 9th planet, Gabriel's fist, Lucifer's hammer. These are all names that have been attributed.
And trumpet sounds. I have to ask you about that later, Stephen.
Well, we'll talk about that, too, because, again, those are signs and sounds in the heaven. And what's fascinating about this is that the atmospheric effects that are taking place, we can look at everything around our solar system and see massive evidence of catastrophic events taking place, where even some of our planets go in retrograde motion, meaning they spin in the opposite direction. What's important to understand in that is that the ancients, and, I spend a lot of time in ancient history. The ancients were not, just basically guys chiseling with a prehistoric rock on a prehistoric wall, having such vast knowledge of the universe that they recorded these events. The famous Bayeux Tapestry shows UFOs. It shows meteors, and some of the great meteor storms have taken place. And what are we seeing now, George? We're seeing handy cams, video cams, CCTV presentations of aerial phenomenon. And it's fascinating because I'm sure you get voluminous amounts of email, people saying it's almost like the battle in outer space has come into our visible realm. And that's exactly what's happening.
Something's going on. And what also is happening, Stephen, I think you've noticed this too. people are acting weird. I have for the last year and a half, 2 years, been talking about sensing something very ominous. I don't know if it was this tragedy in Orlando this past weekend or not, but something's happening to people. Do you sense that?
Well, I sense it, and I get reports of it daily. You know, what's even more astonishing to me is, and this is something people have got to understand, the human brain, and I believe it's a marvelous creation of living God, is designed to function in a specific frequency range and a specific electrical range with CERN. And by the way, CERN's not the only collider of its type. The Russians have their version. The Chinese are building one that makes CERN look like a finger ring. I mean, this is how everyone is experimenting and going beyond even the postulated realms of trillion electron volts, quadrillion electron volts, and the very fabric of society and dimensions that were once closed to mankind are opening up. I get multiple emails daily of people having such horrible and very ugly supernatural experiences. I just posted on my website while I was listening to your other guests talking, and what was some of the shots now that people are getting of UFOs and of fleets of UFOs. I'll tell you one of the most amazing things that I've found out and that blew my mind. Tom Horn and Chris Putnam went to Mount Graham in Arizona, one of the most sacred sites to Native Americans in the world. And when they were at the Lucifer telescope, and that's a binocular telescope. Actually, it's an electronic device in the infrared realm that is associated with the largest binocular telescope in the world. One of the top Vatican astronomers said, sometimes we have to wait for an hour for the field to clear of all the UFOs. Now, that you would think, that's just a guy cracking jokes. Well, most people know some of those scientists have such dry humor that may be the case. But as Tom said, Chris and I looked at each other, and he was dead serious. They didn't ask him about UFOs. It was volunteered. So as we talk tonight about the events taking place, I'll say this, people are losing it. And Gerald Celente has a great statement. He said, when people have nothing to lose, they lose it. But when the electrical field, it used to be the old lunatic word, meaning that the moon, and just as it affects the tide, it affects the human brain and affects the human psyche. It's my contention, and we've talked about it on your show, that the ancients knew about stargates. They knew about skinwalkers. They knew about the different creatures that would come through the stargates, the portals, the ladders, if you will, the dimensional gates. And so the back room scuttle coming from CERN through scientists who some are terrified. The news that is coming out, not officially, is very dangerous. And I think most people should understand that when you have Shiva, the cosmic dance of destruction and recreation, it's fascinating that and very telling that they would choose a Hindu deity that's responsible for the destruction of worlds to be, if you will, the mascot for the very scientific experiment that people are worried about is doing what the mascot, Shiva, represents. So, yes, I'm seeing people losing it. I'm seeing people absolutely crying out for help. It's no, what would you say, exaggeration. It's no attempt to even make it super sensational. These are people, ordinary. These are not people delving into different black arts. They're seeing this stuff, and it's manifesting. And it's manifesting in such a way that literally the gates of hell have opened, and a gate can either hold something back or allow something through it. And what's fascinating to me is concurrent with that are different energy sources now being identified all over the world, for instance, Antarctica. And I know you had Linda Moulton Howe had probably one of the most amazing interviews with someone that worked down there, and you and I talked about it. And for the record, George, people now are recognizing there's something special going on in Antarctica, and I think very dangerous, when the world's leaders, the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Western Catholic Church, are meeting down there, and along with the President of the United States, and all these secret meetings in Patagonia.
Stephen, let's talk a little bit about the trumpets, and then we're going to get into some current events with this strange twist that's happening on this planet. But people are reporting hearing sounds, whether they're loud hums or trumpet sounds. What does that mean revelation-wise? What do the trumpets mean?
Well, the trumpets are a heavenly sign of specific judgments that are befalling the earth. And there are people that are trying to say they're foghorns, but most people that listen to them, even when they're in a wilderness, for instance, some of the ones that are coming from the Ukraine and Siberia and different places around the world, they're so unnerving. Again, they're in a frequency range that most people haven't heard before, and when it's an atmospheric sound, for instance, when an asteroid comes into the Earth's atmosphere, depending on the size, the velocity, it can break the sound barrier, and we're seeing more and more sounds associated with the heavens. Now, getting back to the trumpets, you have the 7 seals that are open in the book of Revelation. Each seal that's open indicates a worsening condition on the earth. It's like the 4 horsemen aren't just pacing now, they're on a gallop.
Yes.
And then you have the issue of how does sound effect matter. We all grew up in television time where they would show the Memorex tape commercial, where they'd hit a wine glass with a certain frequency, and it was either Memorex or TDK, one of the...
And it would shatter, right?
It would shatter, right. Well, that's what's happening in this sound realm, too. It's having an effect on nature. And for the record, Tesla was one who not only experimented with high fields of electricity, geomagnetism, but sound was very important. A laser is light amplification, simulated emission of radiation, and a maser is microwave. But even more than that, if you notice what's happening even with supposedly non-lethal weapons by the military and using them, light air and some of the different, what would you say, like radar-style weapons, they change people. They're absolutely frying them. And I want to share something about the giants. In ancient history, and this is what my concerns are, okay? In ancient history, the voice of the giants had an effect similar to what a lion, when a lion roars in the jungle, anyone who's ever heard a real lion roar in real time, it has an effect on everything. It's almost like everything becomes, quote, paralyzed with fear. And the shrill voice of the giants in antiquity not only was able to put fear, but it was also able somehow to overcome gravity by the sonic effect of the air motion. And this is fascinating because we see all these huge rocks. In our new video series, the second one's coming out by the end of the month, called True Legends, the series, The Unholy Sea. We go into all of the major places in the world, like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo in South America, then over to Malta and Sardinia. And there's so many indications, George, these giant boulders in the Rock of the Pregnant Stone. Some of these things are so big that they defy description. And when you think you see the big ones on top of the surface, you only need to you'd need to dig deeper to find the bigger ones. So the sound effects that are taking place around the world, I believe there are physical reasons for it. For instance, when Mount Tambora exploded in 1815 in Indonesia, the sound was heard all the way to Hawaii. Now, that's obviously, you can explain that by physics. But some of these strange sounds that are literally outside the realm of the normal instrumentation to define it, they have to have an origin outside of the normal parameters of normal physics. In that world, it's called the black world, ultra black world, and it's black physics. Black physics simply means there is a level of science that is not known to the general public and is only made known into the initiates, I think that's the right word, initiates of the people that join the different societies. And the thing that with the secret societies always comes the secret knowledge, the forbidden knowledge, the hidden knowledge. And you've had Michael Cramo on your show
many
before.
times. Yeah.
Yep, and the thing is that I love his title, Forbidden Archaeology. You know, the thing is that the ancients knew how to move stones using sound, and now we've got the situation with, again, we've got beings, entities that have been used to living in a different dimension coming into our dimension, and literally, I think it's obvious to see that people are freaking out, they're creeping out, and pretty soon we're going to see men's hearts failing them for those things coming up on the earth. And what's astonishing, and people better get used to it, when something so beyond your normal realm of being able to cope and define takes place, it is probably the most emotionally, but more importantly, the most mentally destabilizing event in a person's history. I'll give you a good example. When black, and again, I'm talking about secret world of science, physics, and things that go bump in the night, I had a general tell me personally, he said this, he said, the things, I have men who are considered the toughest, most dangerous men in the world, but some of them have literally dropped dead in their tracks. I've said this on different radio shows, but they've literally turned white instantaneously. You've heard the old idiom, they would turn white as a ghost. Well, if you look at the fascination now that mankind has, first in science fiction movies, obviously it started in the world of writing, you cannot separate ancient history, and you cannot separate myths and legends, and even the definition of those different creatures and those different events, for sounds, for instance, lights in the sky, you can't separate them from now what people are reporting all over the world. And the gates are opening, and the Native Americans who contact me are talking about a phenomenon that their forefathers talked to them about, taught them about, and now they're actually experiencing it for themselves.
And this we do also. This is Francis Bacon talking. We have consultation, which of the inventions and experiences which we have discovered shall be published, and which not, and take all an oath of secrecy for the concealing of those which we think fit to keep secret, though some of those we do reveal, sometimes to say, and some not. It was similar to what Dr. von Braun and Dr. Obertroff said about how the Nazis were so able to advance quickly, and they said they had help from outsiders. They had help from aliens. So what's fascinating is Bacon started out in Peru, and Peru is one of the depositories and has one of the largest underground tunnel systems in the world called the Shinkana. And as we've been documenting this in our DVDs, and really important for people to understand, those underground tunnels went worldwide. So in the time of his writing, and obviously he was talking about the New Atlantis, which he never finished, it was all of the technological and scientific marvels of Atlantis that evidently some of the Atlanteans went to Peru, and obviously we're seeing now the opening up of so much advanced technology as the stargates open. So the stargates in Peru, the presence of stargates all over the world, the spiral, for instance, the Norway spiral, we're in the desert Southwest interviewing Native Americans. They're all talking about the same thing, George, and it's that the giants are coming back. It's fascinating. You wouldn't expect that to be coming out of the Native Americans, and we document that in the Unholy Sea. And by the way, because we're in real time now, this is a live broadcast, people can go on Vimeo and download it around the world. That saves them having to pay expensive shipping and postage
Sure.
and waiting, and it's not, wrong word, downloading. They can have unlimited reviews. They can watch it like Netflix. So Francis Bacon was part of a secret society, and whether you call it the Egyptian Brotherhood, a lot of the Masonic and the secret societies are based on advanced knowledge, which they take oaths of secrecy to. The same thing that Hitler's SS, and the SS means the dark sun, not what most people believe it to mean. So the Brotherhood of the occult, the word occult meaning hidden, goes deep into the Peruvian underground. And what is most important is that one of the most famous Peruvian archaeologists, explorers, absolutely established the Chincana, which the tunnel system, and in Cusco, Peru, the Coricancha, which is a giant church, kind of like convent, was built over the entrance to this tunnel system that the Incans and all of the people of that region knew existed. These were built by giants. By the way, these weren't built, and this is something that I want to get out right now. In all of our studies of both the Aztec, the Maya, and the Inca, none of them claimed they built what they possessed.
How do you find these stories?
Well, interestingly enough, a lot of them come off of response from people that listen to Coast and other radio programs that I'm on, and we're literally getting flooded right now with people from Eastern Europe, people from even China, Siberia, saying you've got to come here. We have evidence of giants, and we follow up the leads. And one of the things that's amazing, George, is there's a word I've got to share with people. It's called the Septuagint, and that's the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek. Now listen to this, okay? This is Isaiah 13. Lift up a standard on the mountains of the plain, exalt the voice of them, beckon with the hand, open the gates, ye rulers. I give command and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. You know, we've talked a lot about stargates. It's becoming more prevalent and prominent. For instance, a good example is about maybe a month ago, the NASA announced that there was Martian Morse code. Did you see that story?
Yes, I did.
Well, what's truly intriguing about that is when Tim and my film crew were down in Peru and Bolivia in the Altiplano, and the late David Flynn, who wrote Sidonia, The Secret Chronicle of Mars, put forth the fact that there is an actual language engraved into the landscape. And I've talked to scientists in the last couple months trying to get the deciphering going. Now, it's my contention that obviously NASA and the supercomputers have already deciphered the language of the fallen angels. And isn't it interesting that even the Incan priests had a way of tying knots called quipu and could tell the whole history of the fallen angels, the giants, and everything. So what I'm saying is, as I talk and we research this all over the world, people are talking about strange anomalies, strange phenomenon, stargates opening, everything from flying saucers, orbs, and things have changed, pun intended, in the atmosphere. Even tonight over Pennsylvania, a new strange meteor, and everything is not a meteor. The different colors indicate different compositions. So it's battle in outer space, battle on inner space, battle under the ground, and now things coming up on the ground. And, you know, when you ask me how we follow these leads, we're basically going out of the book of Genesis, chapter 6, talking about the giants in those days before the flood and after those days, and people just don't get it. I mean, I cannot find, after 40 years, any place in the world that does not have its legends of giants and, the fallen angels.
Stephen, blonde Bigfoot?
Well, George, it's a remarkable story. I tried all day to get a hold of Tim Peeler, who lives in basically Cleveland County, North Carolina. But what was amazing about this was obviously him noticing the six fingers. And people should understand that the history of Bigfoot goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I'll give a little bit of a background if I can when we get there. But
Sure.
Basically the the story, and you can go on YouTube or you can go on any search engine and see him talking about the Bigfoot killed one of his dogs, and then I think he had 5 dogs. One of them was killed, and also chickens, and he basically shoot it off with a stick, and it went up the path, and it came back multiple times during the night. Now, most people just laugh and say, well, man, that guy's out there. But what's interesting is that in the very same region, a gentleman with a thermal camera, and a thermal camera is totally different than night vision that works on heat. Okay, you see them obviously in helicopters in the FLIR mode where you see black and white images, and it works on the heat radiating off the body against a field of a known temperature. The point is that the fact that it's blonde, the fact that it had the face of a man, and he drew a picture of it, but he noticed it was 10 feet tall and it had 6 fingers. Now that's critical, because again, as I go back through history, and by the way, I'm tracking another very current good night sighting in the Pacific Northwest right now, and also some pretty interesting bones. And maybe I can't talk about where they're at, but I will say this, that for a long time, George, the standard question I get asked, well, where are all the bones? There are no skeletons. This thing is a national security issue. The reason it's a national security issue is because of a wonderful thing called the double helix, the DNA. Yeah. Now, the very people we talk about, the Illuminati, who has controlled all of the true historic, true archaeological finds, all the rest of the books of Enoch. I have fragments on my website, but there are 359 other books of Enoch. Enoch was given 360 books shown by God how everything in the universe worked, and obviously the Illuminati uses occult and hidden knowledge and keeps it from the rest of us. But the thing that's fascinating about this latest Bigfoot sighting is the sound the thing made. And I'm going to explain to people that every time I do Coast to Coast with you, we do it together, obviously. The thing is that people will call me. It doesn't matter if they're law enforcement guys in the Midwest, the West Coast, the East Coast, and they'll talk about encountering these things that run through forests, knocking down trees. But the thing they always talk about, George, is the sound that is emitted, okay? The sound that is emitted. Now, people say, well, why can't we find those things? It's my contention that they're using basically doorways, because some people call them stargates, and the reason that they have the sound they emit is I one time asked the Special Operations Command General, I said, how do these gates work? And he said they work sonically, they work, and understand, these are people that don't argue that if it's not on Fox, it doesn't exist, okay? If it's not MSNBC, it can't be real. But they work on a power source, they work on basically a sonic, in other words, sound precedes light, even the book of Genesis, and God said, let there be light. So the people who are looking for the God particles should understand that just in the last week, the songs of the sun were just recorded. Did you see that story?
You sure did.
So what I have called all along the harmonics of creation, the sonic nature of the universe, when God said, let there be light, he has the power, by the sheer word of his power, to speak things into existence, okay? People say, I don't believe in God. Well, then, why do you think that every planet, every star, every single human being, you have a song in your genes, and I'm not talking about a CD in your Levi's, okay? I have a song in mine, and everybody has their own harmonic vibrational frequency, okay? Now, interestingly enough, there was a book, and this all relates to what I'm talking to you about Bigfoot, because people say, I don't get it. It's like I track them. I've had people tell me this. I track them. One guy said, Steve, I know how to hunt, but this thing scared the hell out of me. And he said, it's like it vanishes into thin air. Well, in 1879, there was a guy that wrote a novel called, it was Edward Lytton, Lytton, Vril, V-R-I-L, The Power of the Coming Race, describes basically a form of earth energy possessed by an extremely powerful subterranean race associated with life-giving elixirs. Now, but listen to this. At the heart of the Vril, this is what Hitler was into big time, and we've talked about Nietzsche and Übermensch, the Superman, okay?
knowledge of sonic equations with mirrored waveforms of light and electromagnetism capable of interacting with and affecting the human nervous system and consciousness as well as other life forms, geophysical structures, planets, and other stellar systems. In other words, the sound, George, is absolutely what is, in my opinion, based on what I know at this point, and I'm open to anything more, but the sound is what these things are having to use for dimensional portals, and they can basically go in and out, they can phase in and phase out, and the sound is basically when they're either activating, because I've noticed something in all, and you know I spend my life tracking this stuff, in every situation it's a sound that either seems to bring them on the scene or take them off the scene.
Is anybody investigating this scientifically, Stephen?
Oh, sure. There are a lot of guys. There's a great website, by the way, if people want to see the history of it. I think it's called BigfootLives.com, and with a hyphen between Bigfoot and lives. And I think the thing that people need to understand is that there's a lot that's known but isn't made public, okay? For instance, every single species, the reptilians that David Icke talks about and others talk about, and by the way, Quetzalcoatl, the god of the Aztecs, was a giant plumed serpent in a 10-foot tall reptilian. You know, you can claim what you want, but that's who they claim was their progenitor. The Aztec, Incan, and Mayans, George, all claim that their civilizations and their architecture was built by giants. But here, let's get back to Bigfoot. And most people would be astonished to know that, the first recorded account in North America is in 986 when Leif Erikson and his, men landed. They talked about the horrible, ugly, hairy, swarthy, and big black-eyed men, okay? Now, that's pretty interesting. Most people, some people get hung up on who really discovered America. Well, even goes before that. Obviously, the Celts were here even before Leif Erikson, and the Hebrews were here 2,000 years before this. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that you can go to medieval wood carvings and they'll show a hairy wild man, which, interestingly enough, the Bible talks about the lion men of Moab. And the thing that's fascinating to me is you track it all through history. They're known as the Matlocks, the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, wild men, and the Oma, O-M-A-H, and you're going to love this one, Skookums, and the Skookums, and those were cannibals, okay? And what are called the Bukwas, B-U-K-W-A-S. Now, obviously, the Yeti, some people pronounce it, and all over the world. See, this is something you can't escape. So this isn't just a guy with the invention of Kodak 8mm movie film filming the first Bigfoot. And what I'm told again, and have been told many times, that the species, and I believe they call Bigfoot Species 7 or Species 8, everything that is, if you will, imaginary to us or the things of nightmares, that which exists in the real world has a species designation with all of the differentiations within the species. I'm not just talking about Bigfoot now. I'm talking about the different aliens, all that stuff. Now, again, when we talk about this stuff, people say, oh, right, like really. No, listen, history is on our side. The reason, and I want to address this, the reason the bones of all the giants that have been found, I document over 200 or 300 that I know of in my book alone, Genesis 6 Giants, and I'm encouraging, George, everybody to get that book, because I have said this for the last 30 years. What you have been dismissing as fantasy, myth, and legend is going to simply appear on the scene with such rapidity that people's hearts are going to fail them for looking after all these things coming upon the earth. So for this man to see, Tim Peeler to see a six-fingered, 10-foot-tall, blonde Yeti, or Sasquatch, we'll call it whatever, Bigfoot. The thing is, and to be able to define the noises is so tantamount to me that he is seeing the real thing. Because when you see the fakes, one of the things I always ask them, tell me what you sensed in the air. Tell me what the hair on the back of your head did. Tell me the sounds you heard. Did you get a pain in the back of your neck? This isn't because, this is 101 ways to tell if a Bigfoot setting is real or not, but those are electromagnetic waves emanating from the skulls. Remember I told you about Dr. Moldashep going to Tibet and literally seeing a giant that was in stasis, in other words, suspended animation.
Right.
I've told you about the fact is that the monks told him you can't go beyond, this line. If you go beyond the line,
you'll die. And he didn't understand the, if you will, the electromagnetic projection, even while these things are in suspended animation. By the way, I was told that how, if you will, how the giants, the real giants, I'm not talking about the tall, I'm talking 6 fingers, double rows of teeth individuals hunt, and they hunt by the harmonics of DNA.
Are they violent?
Oh, absolutely. So see, what's happening is the entities that have been bound in the abyss. God really does love his creation, and what people don't understand is that God gave mankind, the mankind that he created, he gave them basically liberty of free will, but also authority. And now the people who are basically at war with the living God are taking that authority and they're releasing these things and they're opening the gates. Jesus said that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church, meaning, and his church isn't a building, it isn't a steeple, it's the people that gather his name, ecclesia, those that having the fellowship of him in common. The bottom line is so when you're dealing with the sound and the frequencies of the Bigfoot, and you're dealing with now the appearance and disappearance of them, it's now amazing to me that I think there's a whole new area of understanding and investigation opening up, because you cannot mess around with electronic or electromagnetic spectrum and not pick it up. Okay?
How many of them do you think are out there, the species of the Bigfoot family?
I asked that question, and basically I was told this answer, whether it will suffice thousands. I'm talking throughout the world now. I'm not
throughout
just talking.
The world. Yeah, and that's not a lot.
No, but the thing is, and I asked, how about, the head of Skunk Works, I used to have his quote up on my website, said, if the American people ever found out we've already been to the planets, been to the stars, and been beyond that, they basically string us up. The bottom line is, I asked, how many species of aliens are there? And you said millions. Now, so if somebody who lives in that world, and trust me, with the way their men react, these guys really are who they say they are. And the point is that I think it's the old adage. How will people accept a warning? In other words, let's just put it into Steve and George. George, you tell me, hey, Steve, I think that somebody's going to burn down your house. I saw a guy with matches and a gas can, and I think, he didn't look like a happy camper and looked like he had your house. There is an evidentiary or a body of evidence that everyone has to move on or move forward with, correct? If
Sure.
I choose to say, I don't believe you, George, and my house burns down, it's not that, my believing whether it would
I told you, right?
You told me. And see, this is the thing. It's beyond I told you so. The very Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, most people, and look, when I have multiple sources telling me this, people in the intelligence community, people in the military, people in the scientific community telling that all the stuff that they're doing to attenuate, turning into you've had Kurzweil on your show, singularity. You're going to the whole Ubermensch thing now in a whole new dimension, okay? It's like this. It's like the devil saying, I can do a better job creating mankind or recreating them in my image, God, than yours. If people don't believe in the God of heaven or the devil, the bottom line is then let them explain free will, because free will isn't a biologically determined function, or we'd all be thinking the same thing and doing the same thing, okay? But the point is that we are now dealing with things that are beyond our immediate grasp and comprehension. It's just like you and I. We'd like to think that people really care for people living on the Gulf Coast or on the West Coast. By the way, the West Coast doesn't get a reprieve either. The seismic loading of faults. Loading of faults is a term used in the military, meaning that you literally pulse energy into a fault and you use it as an energy sink or an energy battery, and with the whole idea of causing the plates to move. So, there's so much what I call black science out there, black meaning secret science, and it's all at their fingertips and at their control. And at the end of the day, the whole issue is destroying mankind, 5.5 billion people.
In your opinion, do you think Bigfoot could be supernatural, dimensional, or very physical?
I think it's all three. I believe it can basically transcend dimensions. I call them, in my earlier writings, I called them transmorphic demonic entities. They take on physicality. They obviously eat chickens and eat dogs and people at some cases. And the people who defend Bigfoot say, well, there's only 2 cases of it. Well, I can tell you this. In history, the giants were fee-fi-fo-fum. Smell the blood of an Englishman, okay? The thing that is really amazing to me is that there's such a disconnect between what history states versus what is happening. Again, if you knew that you could extract live DNA, remember when Spielberg did Jurassic Park on Michael Crichton's novel?
Yeah.
That was so astonishing to people, yet understand when that stuff leaks into the world of film, it's already been done, okay? It's not that it's plausible. It's not even that it's possible. It's already been done. And you and I, George, have talked at length. Have you seen the movie Splice yet?
No, I have not.
Okay, without ruining for everybody, it's simply this. Artificial life form is made in a laboratory between 2 scientists who have a love interest in each other. The woman scientist takes her DNA, inserts it into the artificial life form, which they've created from scratch, and it creates kind of like a female-looking character that looks all the way female, except she has a tail, okay? Well, interestingly enough, okay, you would think, okay, here's an earthly female inserting her DNA into an artificially grown biomass, and all of a sudden this girl that they call Dren, and by the way, I'm just telling you, this is in-your-face stuff.
I wonder if that's what Mothman was.
Well, I got to tell you something. That's what you relate to, isn't it?
Yep.
That's what you sync with. So, okay, now you have a story. You've got a story of artificial life being created in the laboratory. You've got, Splice is so in your face. But as I tracked it back and trying to think, okay, where could that gene have come? And obviously the answer is either the man had to carry the gene of the Nephilim or the woman. And somebody says, well, that's just science fiction. Okay, but ladies and gentlemen, every day hundreds of stories are appearing on artificial life, singularity, the end of man, the new coming man, the idea that get rid of everybody on the planet and start out with a whole new creation that basically is programmed to live differently. See, that's what Jesus said if he didn't intervene, George, in the book of Revelation, that, if God simply didn't act, that men left to their own devices, evil and totally wicked, are going to destroy. And people said, I don't believe it.
Stephen, one of our Streamlink members from Scotland sent you an email today, and I wanted you to talk with us about this. This is about an old story that occurred in the 1930s. What did you think of that one?
Well, again, George, what people can't get around, he was talking about a giant that was in a stream in India, and this gentleman ran into him, and basically the link that he sent us, it wasn't a lot, as you know, but he said that it took the man months to recover. He was so disturbed by what he saw. That's pretty much it in in an encapsulated version. But the point is that there are literally tens of thousands of people who run into giants, and I'm talking about, when I'm talking giants now, I'm not just talking about big guys like someone who's 7'6". To my definition of giant, they got to be at least 10 feet tall, okay? Now, 9 feet would probably send chills down most of our spines, but there are certain things that have to take place. I think that if you go through history, even like the front of my book, and by the way, George, the front of my book, those guys are in the Kashmir region of Afghanistan and Pakistan and India, kind of where all the mountains come together. And that was taken in 1910. My front of my book, for those of you who have never seen it, is Genesis 6. And I really want to make an informational suggestion. For those of you that are starting to see the availability of this stuff coming into play, in other words, more reports of these things, you need to understand, in my opinion, what's really going on. And the only place you can get the books is on the Internet, SteveQuayle.com, or call tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Stan and Holly are sleeping now, but 719-547-9100, 719-547-9100. And that's where you can also get my book, Long Walkers. And, George, we had the pilot who flew a dead giant out of Afghanistan several years ago on your show. I actually have his letter to me. He said he listened to Coast to Coast. He thought I was full of you-know-what. Then until he got ordered to fly, went out. And by the way, since he went public with that. He's been given every quote unquote, you know what kind of mission that, he's paying a price for telling us what he told us, okay? And he said, Steve, even if it costs me my career, I will come on, again, Coast, and tell people what's really going on. Because, again, George, this is a gentleman that is absolutely not a friend of a friend of a friend. He's the guy that flew it out. Even could tell me the pallet number, what the thing weighed, where they flew it, and how the spooks, meaning the intelligence people, came on the plane to take out any phones that might have cameras, any cameras. I mean, they went through their pockets and everything. So when people say, well, why don't people get pictures of these things or blah, blah, blah? Well, the bottom line is the minute you do is that the spooks, meaning intelligence or the FBI, somebody shows up to either threaten you. We've had listeners to your show that have unearthed giant skeletons where the head, the mandible to mandible, in the back of the skull is, the condyle to condyle is 24 inches, okay? Mm-hmm. The molars are the size of a fist. Now, these aren't Neanderthals, okay? And by the way, isn't it interesting? They're no longer in the tree of mankind's evolutionary background, but they're a whole separate species. The point is, every time that anything shows up, it absolutely is confiscated immediately. People don't realize this, but in the United States, there is the Native American Antiquities Act that automatically states that any bones found of any size are Native American artifacts, and I'm not talking about grave-robbing Indian graves. I'm talking about even the Kennewick Man in Washington, which was considered a Native American artifact until the people that went to court proved it was an Irishman, okay? The point that I'm trying to make is that it's an ultimate secrecy. It's just like this. We all know about Roswell. We all know about the guys who were there, saw what they saw, written the books and everything. But you know, and I know, we still get people that say, oh, they're crazy. They believe in UFOs. No, we don't believe in UFOs. We just acknowledge that they exist. So when it comes to giants, we're dealing with the same thing. Whether it's 1930 or 33 in India, whether it's the gentleman in North Carolina, whether it's 100 or 200 or 2,000 encounters with something other than what's normal, whether it's Mothman, whether it's this, that, or the other thing. The thing is that if someone says, well, it isn't real because I don't believe it, whether they believe it or not doesn't make it real or not. It's just that they don't believe it. And the thing is even if you were to give them undeniable proof, then they try and explain around. Well, it's acromegaly. That's what I always get. Acromegaly is a disease like Andre the Giant suffered from, and some of the big guys that are tall suffer from. It's a debilitating disease, and ultimately they die in a very short time.
Do you think Goliath was a giant?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Bible talks about not only Goliath being a giant, but Og, the king of Bashan. Bashan, by the way, was the land of the giants. And I can tell you point blank that the argument is whether Og was 15 feet or 18 feet tall. Goliath is presumed to have been 9 feet to 12 feet. And by the way, the reason David cut his head off, most people don't know their Bible very well, but, David and Goliath, some people say, oh, it's just a figure of speech. No, they've actually found stuff dating from that period. And the thing that is interesting is that, remember when I sent you the link on the axes that were found?
I'm looking at them right now.
Right. And I said, the U.S. military policy on giants is don't axe, don't tell. The point is that those axes were found in the area of Crete, and they're in a museum, but the whole basis of the oral tradition, written tradition of that part is that there were giants in Crete. They're still believed to be labyrinths in which people have disappeared. I had I don't know if you call him Cretan, but a Cretan call me and say he heard me on your show the last time I was on talking about giants, and he said, I want you to know we still have people that encounter these things in the grottos and caves on Crete. So the thing is that, this program goes worldwide. So typically I will get emails from all over the world, and I mean all over the world, sometimes 100 emails from different countries saying, well, so-and-so saw something. And it's not people feeding off each other, okay? It's not hysteria. It's not grandstanding, because some of these people can provide information that I don't even talk about on Coast, okay? Because if I did, then people would just feed back to me the same stuff they've heard me say. So you have to have some form of a Rosetta Stone to test to see that the sightings or the encounters are real.
Some of these internet pictures that we've seen all over the place, Stephen. Some of them look pretty darn provocative. I got to tell you that.
Right, and most of those have never shown up on my website because a lot of them are Photoshopped. Now, the one that isn't, you'll see a guy that he looks like in Australia, and he's kneeling, and on the wall there's a giant skeleton that's kind of impregnated in the sediment. Do you know that one, George?
No, tell me about that.
Okay, it's interesting because Australia has a tradition of giants. I mean, just a tradition, and a lot of the biggest bones have been found there. I've even had Australians who own property in Australia call me and tell me that the equivalent of the Australian intelligence has come to them and taken the artifacts they found. You remember the caves paintings of the Wajina? The Wajina are the guys who look like they're in robes with a space helmet on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the bottom of the historical, what do you call it? The oral tradition of the natives, the Aborigines, and everything they talk about. That's the dream period. And the thing that's interesting is that so many of the artifacts, whether they're cave paintings, cave drawings, sand, whatever was chronicled in whatever medium, the thing that's fascinating is that, again, it doesn't matter if you're in Australia, it doesn't matter if you're in the Arctic, doesn't matter if you're in any part of the world. It's always the same story, that there were giants in those days. And people don't understand. There were giants both before the flood and after the flood. And the thing that's interesting about that is that some of the words in Hebrew actually indicate, if you will, the twisting of the DNA. In other words, the genetic manipulation of DNA. That's what Tom Horn has been writing about as probably as long as I have. And the twisting of the DNA is what is so interesting from the standpoint, if you deal with the Atlantis legends and myths, if you deal with Lemuria, if you deal with Hyperborea, if you deal with Shangri-La and Shambhala, and all of the, if you will, mythical lands, the interesting thing is you can't get away from giants. You just can't.
No, you can't.
It's throughout history. So the thing is that, keep it simple, stupid. The Occam's razor states that probably if it's in your face and it's simple to understand, don't make it more complicated. But why this stuff is all kept in abeyance, the truth, is because it's just like the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's just like all of the artifacts. When people ask me where they're at, it's like Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark. They end up in crates in some place, or they end up in some private collection of some really wealthy guy. And it's like people should go on my website, stevequayle.com, click on the giants, and the Book of Giants is a copper scroll. In other words, it's something written thousands of years ago that explains the whole fallen angel interaction with human beings, the genetic manipulation of insects, of reptiles, of everything. So when we're seeing all these hybrid creatures, chimeras or chimeras, some people pronounce them, satyrs, all of the things in mythological folklore, and now we're seeing that people are saying, we can reconstitute, in other words, reanimate anything. It's fascinating because here's a story that people should understand, that evil spirits, the word demon means disembodied spirit, okay? A demon is not a fallen angel. There are some people who use the terms interchangeably. They're not the same. In order for something to be disembodied, it originally had to be embodied. So the demons, when somebody dies, let's say someone who's demon-possessed, take anybody in history, Stalin, whoever the great mass murderers, Jack the Ripper, whatever, those demons, Hitler, those demons, they are eternal beings. They don't just basically crash when its host crash. Can you imagine, George, the DNA of, welcome back? That's what Jesus said. When demons cast out, it goes and wanders in dark places until it finds a host, a suitable house to enter into. So imagine there's a group of individuals out there that have collected the DNA or have acquired the DNA of some of the most incorrigible and most disgusting historic murders in history, and imagine reanimating them. Look, I'm not sitting here now watch someone steal what we're talking about and go put it in a movie script, but imagine that can really be done. And then imagine that if you're making war against the human race, and that's what these people are, they're misanthropes. They absolutely hate the human race. And the bottom line is that all-out war is going to be levied against us, and it's my contention that right now you won't see just a linear scale of events. You'll see compounding events. You'll look to the left, bad news. Look to the right, even worse news. Look behind you, cascading bad news, a tsunami. Look in front of you, the solar storm. It's like so much is happening now, and there's never been a period in time. Look, everybody said, oh, they thought the end of the world would be this, that, or that, and I don't believe the end of the world. I just believe that the bottom line is, in other words, the world isn't going to end. The point is, though, it's going to go through such drastic and dangerous war in all realms that literally men's hearts are failing them for fear of looking after those things coming up on earth. So what's the antidote for fear? Understanding this stuff, even if you don't agree with it. But the point is, like anybody who teaches survival, you don't say that your ultimate survival tool is a Swiss Army knife and a flint, so you can at least make fire and stay warm. No, it's your head. It's the knowledge that you have, and that's what I've devoted my life to. I get a kick out of it. People that have never even read one volume of any ancient writings telling me there are no such things as giants because there are no bones, or saying me, all that God stuff, that's just crazy stuff. Oh yeah, well the devil believes God's real, and so do his adherents. And they absolutely know this is a battle. It's a battle just like in any of the cinema, the battle of the light versus dark, good versus evil, and the book of Revelation. And I want to share something, George. People quote it, but they don't understand that the book of Revelation is the revelation that God gave to John. John is the Apostle John, on the island of Patmos concerning Jesus. And then Jesus is the one that is stepping up the plate, opening up the seals that are telling us all what's going to happen. So the thing is, it's not the revelation of Buddha, it's not the revelation of the Hindu gods, it's not the revelation of everybody out there, their favorite holy guy. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ, and Jesus is the one that's telling. It's funny because I have people all the time quote Revelation. They say, "But I don't like Jesus," or "I don't believe in Jesus." I said, "Why do you think that is?" And they said, well, because he's just one of many. I said, yeah, but who else makes the claim he did? And by the way, I don't see his bones being paraded around. I think the problem is, George, is that it comes when you try and bring the physical and the spiritual together. And see, these guys that you and I and Alex talk about, these guys are big time into the occult. These guys are big. And by the way, we just passed the June solstice, and now we're going into a period of 7 days. I just got an email stating that LIBOR, the London interbank rates, that they're expecting that whole thing to crash, next week. So the date I was given by my friend in China, who, by the way, is listening to us in real time, it's morning over there, everybody that I know, it doesn't matter what area of the world they're in, doesn't matter what field they're in, it's that sense that something's so ominously wrong, so something is so dangerously on the horizon. And what I'm trying to help people is, look, put 2 and 2 together. 2 and 2 still equals 4, no matter what MSNBC says, no matter what Fox says. And if people can begin to put stuff together and say, now I understand. And if they understand, then that will motivate them to get themselves and their families to the best of their ability out of harm's way. And it begins with, obviously, look, we're not going to live through this thing that's coming just by our own strength, our wits, or, I've had guys in special operations that are, cleaners, assassins, and everything say, no one's going to stop them. I said, you know what? You may be good at what you do, but the smallest germ you encounter that you've never encountered before that can take your life or take you down, how are you going to deal with that? You see, the thing is that we all make plans to deal with what we know, but now we have to deal with some of the unknowns that are coming fast upon us.
With what we don't know.
You got it. But the thing is that, hey, the same guy that said this is how the world is going to come into focus in the last days also said, I'm not going to leave you or forsake you. That's what Jesus said. I get a lot of flack, George, because, people say, well, I like to hear about your giants, but keep all that stuff about Jesus to yourself. Well, I got news for you. Jesus is the one that gave me all this stuff about giants. So if God is giving us the beginning and he's giving us the end, then, then there's a point here, faith. And faith has to be directed at someone, and that someone's got to be proven to come through. And I have people
After I do the show, I'll get 100 emails, love the show, 10 hate the show. The point is that they should listen to the message and start to put into perspective that how will they react to food being unavailable? How will they react to maybe being billeted out of their homes? And how will they react as a gun owner, as a constitutionalist, as a patriot, as a veteran, as a talk radio show host? How will they react when everything that we're doing to tell people the truth by those who are trying to hold the truth as a lie want those of us who are trying to tell the truth silenced? Internet, there's going to be new regulations on that.
Some people get upset, Stephen, because they just don't believe this could happen.
Well, right. And again, by the way, when you study crime and you study the psychology of attacks on innocent people, do you know up until the point that they're literally attacked and hurt, they believe, even while they're being attacked, this can't be happening to me. I don't believe it. You follow me?
Now, what happened to the Giants? Did they get wiped out in the flood?
Well, the first set got wiped out in the flood. The second set, basically, and that's what the Bible deals with, and they fled all over the earth, okay? Joshua and Caleb go into the promised land. They say they're as grasshoppers in their sight. These guys, George, fled all over the earth. With their power, their strength, their ability, and their technology, they absolutely fled to the four corners of the earth. I mean, in my book, I've chronicled, I think one of the very first times you and I ever talked was about a group of Indians in South America that were literally pillaged, and I'm talking the women, were pillaged by these guys. And for the record, fallen angels can size themselves appropriately. Fallen angels don't always come on the scene as giants, okay?
All right, Stephen. Thanks so much.
Bye, George. Thank you very much.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.